Board of Directors. So the Board of Directors are the people that you'll need to run and govern the organization. You'll want to find at least 3 unrelated people, and ideally, I think at least 5, because that way if you have a few people who can't attend a meeting, then you can still move forward with the meeting and make a decision. It's always good to have an odd number of board members to help avoid tie votes. The qualities you're looking for in board members may vary from organization to organization, but it's always a good idea to have a board that is majority unrelated. This is something the IRS may ask about, your funders may ask about, and it will help avoid conflicts of interest and the perception of conflicts of interest. So if you have a 5-member board and 2 people are related, maybe they're married, they are related in some other way, or they're business partners, you want to have at least 3 others on the board who are not related to anyone else, so that you still have a majority unrelated board. You want people who bring a variety of skills, resources, and funds to the organization, and people who are not looking for personal gain, because the board of directors of a nonprofit is not paid for what they do. They serve as volunteers because they believe in what the organization does. We'll talk about the difference between the unpaid board of directors and the paid staff of a nonprofit in just a moment. You want people who reflect the community that you serve, because those are the people who are going to know the most about what the needs are for your organization to do, and who are going to be able to bring the organization's message to the community and bring the community's needs to the board. You want people who are going to be reliable, because you're going to be relying on them to do a great deal of the work to get the organization up and running, and you want them to work well together. And you also want people who are there because they're passionate about the organization's mission. They're giving their time because they really believe in what this organization does. Next, you'll want to think about who the officers on the board will be. So officers are people with specific roles on the board of directors. They are all board members. All your officers will serve on the board, but they have additional roles. In Maryland, you must have a president, a secretary, and a treasurer on your board. You really want the president and the vice president to be different people. Legally, those must be 2 different people if you have someone in the vice president role. And the president and the treasurer should also not be the same person, because you really want to have 2 sets of eyes on the finances of the organization, maybe 2 people signing off on checks and other financial transactions. So your board might have officers in the president, secretary, and treasurer positions. Maybe you've also got a vice president, even though that's not required. But then you may have others who serve on the board who don't have an officer role. So you can look at this way of structuring the organization to get an idea of what your organization's structure will look like. There's 2 different ways to structure a nonprofit, just depending on what the organization does. So on the left, you have a membership organization structure. And this is an organization like a community association that has a membership from community residents, or a religious organization like a church that has a membership. On the right, you have a board-only organization. And this is, many types of organization will fall into this category, because these are organizations that provide services or do something in the community, but they don't have a membership. So for example, a neighborhood tutoring program doesn't have a membership. It serves the community, and it has a board of directors that you can consider the membership, because that's who's going to be deciding on the new board. They'll vote in new board members, and they will have the power to make major decisions and amend the bylaws. So in either case, you have the board of directors, and then the smaller category within that is your officers. So the president, vice president if you have one, treasurer, and secretary. You can see that circle is part of the larger board circle. They are board members. They just have those additional officer roles. For a membership organization, you can see that both the board of directors and the officers circles are within the membership circle. So your board and your officers are members of the organization. You select your board from the membership, and then you select your officers from the board of directors. This is an example for a community association to give you an idea of what it might look like if you have a larger membership structure. So for a community association, you might say, we are residents of Shady Acres, and anyone who lives in Shady Acres can become a member. So your membership includes people like Nellie Neighbor and Rhonda Resident and many others. A community association might have 100 members or more, and from that membership of 100 people, you'll elect your board of directors. So within the board circle, you have Bob, Brenda, and Betsy, along with the officers, who again also sit on the board, Paul, Vicky, Tim, and Sandy. So you have 7 board members, and of those 7 board members, 4 are officers. And all of those people are members of the organization. They're all residents of Shady Acres, and so they are members of the community association. Your board's responsibilities are to govern and manage the organization. The board is there to make sure the organization has the resources it needs for success. Financially, some grant makers will require that in order to be eligible for grants, every board member may have to make monetary contributions to the organization. So if you're planning to apply for a grant and a grant maker requires this, they'll ask, has every board member made a financial contribution to your organization? And that may be different depending on the board members. You might have some board members who are able to contribute more financially than others, and some board members might contribute in other ways with their time, with their skills. But you may want to consider that this is something that some grant makers will require, that they'll want to see that every board member has skin in the game for believing in and supporting the organization financially. Board members also have what are called fiduciary duties under state law. So the most important thing to keep in mind with these fiduciary duties is that for nonprofit directors, whenever they're making a decision for the organization, they have to act in the organization's best interest as they see it. So that means that if they hear about opportunities like grants, they must offer those opportunities to the organization first before they take advantage of those opportunities themselves or for their business. They must keep information confidential if it's discussed at a board meeting that's only open to board members or if it's otherwise confidential. And they must be aware of existing laws and regulations that affect the organization and the organization's internal policies. All of those things will depend on the board members using their good judgment to make decisions. And so they should always be thinking about, what do I think is in the best interest of this organization, rather than relying on someone else's judgment. They can obviously talk to each other and compare what they think is in the best interest of the organization, but if you as a board member have a different idea about what's in the best interest of the organization, then you should make that clear. Make that clear in the discussion, in your vote. If you believe the organization is doing something that is inappropriate, then it's your responsibility to speak up and make that known. Board and staff distinction. So the board of directors of a nonprofit, again, is not paid for what they do. They are volunteers. But you can have a paid staff. So once your organization has a track record, it's been operating for enough time that it's able to get financial support and be able to hire a paid staff member, then you've got this board and staff distinction. Because the board of directors is overseeing and managing the staff, you don't want anyone to be in a position where they are overseeing and managing themselves. You want to keep your board and staff very separate and distinct so that it's clear whether someone is in a governing board role or a staff role where they get the board's decisions and then they carry out those decisions on a day-to-day level. So you can think of your board as the part above that line as your kind of legislative branch of the organization. They develop policy, they decide on the ends, they're the head of the organization. Below that line, you have the staff, and they're more of the executive branch. They implement the policy that the board has decided on. They determine the means to accomplish the ends. They act and do, and they are the hands of the organization. So you really want to keep these two roles very separate. You don't want to have anyone serving in both a board and a staff role. Except one, the only exception really that you want to think about is if you have an executive director, a paid staff executive director, they will sit on the board of directors, but in a non-voting role. That way they can bring the board's decisions back to the staff to say, here's what we've been, here's the mandate we've been given and what we must accomplish. And then they can bring the staff's day-to-day work to the board and say, here's what we've been working on to accomplish the goals you've set out for us, and here's the support that we need from you. So they are there as a conduit between the board and the staff, but you don't, again, want them making decisions that oversee their performance, their compensation. So you really want to be careful to keep those board and staff roles very separate.